Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Cornerstone's Torah Midrash, May of 2022. We could all rise for the blessing of the Torah reading. Baruchu et Yahweh Hamivarak. Baruchu et Yahweh Hamivarak le'olam va'ed. Baruch Yahweh Hamivarak le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bakar banu mikol ha'amin v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Yahweh, Baruch Shemo, Notein HaTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, Yahweh our Elohim, King of the universe, who has chosen us from among all peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Yahweh, bless his name, giver of the Torah. Tim, it's not coming up. I can sympathize with being a little slow in the morning. Thank you so much. Today's parashah is number 31 on the yearly schedule, called Emor, and it's from Vayikra, Leviticus 21, verse 1, through the chapter 24, verse 23. And today we're going to be reading chapter 24, 1 through 16. And I have a slightly different translation on there this morning. It's called the Scriptures. And hopefully you won't get too lost in there. It's a good one. It's the pastor has it right up here. I've on here. We've ordered books from them by the case. So, but like every translation, you have to take it as it is. I have a volunteer to read. I think Miranda just did.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Command the children of Israel that they bring to you clear oil of pressed olives for the light, to make the lamps burn continually. Outside the veil of the witness, in the tent of appointment, Aharon is to arrange it from evening until morning before Yehovah continually, a law forever throughout your generations. He is to arrange the lamps on the clean gold lampstand before Yehovah continually. And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it, 2/10 of an ephah in each cake. And you shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the clean table before Yehovah. And you shall put clear frankincense in each row, and it shall be on the bread as a remembrance portion, an offering made by fire to Yehovah. On every Sabbath he is to arrange it before Yehovah continually from the children of Israel, an everlasting covenant. And it shall be for Aharon and his sons that they shall eat it in the set-apart place, because it is most set apart to him from the offerings of Yehovah made by fire, an everlasting law. And the son of an Israeli woman, whose father was a Mitzrayim man, went out among the children of Israel, and the Israeli woman's son and a man of Israel strove in the camp. And the Israeli woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed. So they brought him to Moshe. Now his mother's name was Shalomith, the daughter of Debri, of the tribe of Dan. And they put him under guard, that it might be declared to them at the mouth of Yehovah. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Bring the one who has cursed outside the camp, and all those who heard him shall lay their hands on his head, and all the congregation shall stone him. And speak to the children of Israel, saying, anyone who curses his Elohim shall bear his sin. And he who blasphemes the name of Jehovah shall certainly be put to death, and all the congregation certainly stone him, the stranger as well as the native. When he blasphemes the name, he is put to death.
Thank you. Everybody can go ahead and be seated. Now you notice there was a little bit of a typing difference, couple of different selection of words. Same meaning is clearly there. Mitzrayim is Egypt. So it was a son of an Israeli woman and an Egyptian. Those are the ones that were doing those. The tent of meeting is the tabernacle. Okay. Sometimes when you take a word or a name from one language and put it into another, there's various ways to spell it. So on this one with Moshe, they had an H on the end also, which is also proper. You could go M-O-S-H-E or M-O-S-H-E-H. Just kind of depends on how you do that. So those of you who are used to working with foreign languages understand that. Okay, this week's parashah subject headings are quite numerous this time. So we have the holiness and the priest, which actually lasts about a chapter and a half. And then we have acceptable offerings, appointed times of Yahweh, the Sabbath, Passover, first fruits, counting of the weeks, which is what we're doing now in Shavuot, which in the Greek, for those of you raised up in the church, you know that's Pentecost. That's the Greek term for it. Then you have trumpets, the Day of Atonement, tabernacles, the lamps, bread for the tabernacle, punishment for blasphemy, and then an eye for an eye. A lot of subject headings. And I have, again, some questions here for discussion to get things going. But there's a lot in, again, as it seems like every week we say that, there's a lot here. And so going through all the feast days, that's very important. Like we call them feast days by happenstance, but actually they're not all quite feasting as far as getting together and doing a lot of food stuff. But they're the appointed times of Yahweh is technically what they are. Moed in Hebrew, so if there's plural, you put an I-am on the end, Moedim. And so now you know it's the plural appointed times of Yahweh. So who's got some questions there? Or comments?
Well, this is shows the need for Yeshua. He's the only way. How strict these purity laws were for the priest, and because they were face to face with Yahweh or Yeshua, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it shows that the blood covers all these, and we need that because they're just, you had to almost lock yourself in a room and be by yourself to stay pure enough to approach our living God.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the biggest things that in this Torah portion that I like to quote is, it calls those feasts a holy convocation,
mm-hmm.
which is a gathering of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And it specifically says the seventh-day Sabbath
mm-hmm.
is a holy convocation, that you're to gather on this. So in recent times, we had this big coronavirus scare.
Mm-hmm.
And most people forsook the gathering of the Sabbath, because right off the bat. They woke up a little later, but there were people with insight that just refused. You're one of them. That didn't miss the Sabbath gathering one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a lesson for us. And I love this Torah portion because of that.
Good, thanks, Darren. Yep, we got a comment down in front. I think Jill has become our microphone runner this morning. I can only think of two people in here that could run the fastest, and Jill's one of them. Yes, sir.
In answer to your question up there about why is that a chapter and a half?
Yeah.
They're human.
That's good. It takes us a chapter and a half to finally get holy enough to go in God's presence, or to serve Him in His house. Really, the tabernacle was His house with us for hundreds of years, and then later on, he had them build the temple, and then that was there then. So that's a good point. I think I saw a couple other hands up about any comments or questions. Yeah, Jill.
Well, one thing I found very interesting, I knew that for quite a while that feasts, Moedim was translated as feasts, which I always thought was kind of an odd translation for it. It actually means appointed time. But what I didn't realize until I went back over this passage, I'm talking Leviticus 23, but what I didn't realize is that King James actually translates both Hag and Moedim as feasts, which can really lead to a fairly serious misinterpretation, I would guess. But anyway, I found that very interesting. So now whenever I see feasts, I'm going to go back and check those words because, Yom Kippur is not a feast, for example. It's a moed, but I thought that was real interesting.
Yeah, it is a good point. Sometimes we have one word, but there's, like in the Greek for the word love, there's actually generally 3 types of Greek words for love. Depends on what type of love it is. We have the word love. Yeah, so it seems like, because Joe was questioning on that one too, when we were talking about this Torah portion during the week, and it was just interesting. Yeah, there are 2 words that could be translated. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So I had a question about they talk about the holy sacrifices and it's the holy food, and they're not if they're unclean, they're not allowed to eat the holy food. So are not all of those, because I know that basically the priests get that food and that's one of the ways they survive. So my question is not all the food or the sacrifice food holy or extra holy to where when they take it home, if they have guests come over to their house, because it says only the priests and their immediate family and servants are allowed to eat that holy food, but nobody else is. So do they have different food for their guests, or how does that all kind of run together?
I have a question. Where is that in Scripture that when the Levites go home and take the food with them, that the guests have to eat a different food?
Well, it doesn't it doesn't talk about guests, but it talks about only your family and your servants.
Yeah, but do you remember where that is? Sorry. Because it really helps to know the context sometimes. And while we're waiting on that, Jill, Darren's got a hand up there.
Well, the answer to that question is the priests had land, and they did have crops and vineyards and other food to eat. So a lot of the priests weren't in service and in the temple eating that food. And they would, rotate service. And so they did have outside sources of food. None of them went hungry.
Yeah. That's a good point. There was a whole system set up with the tribe of Levi, and they weren't given land as in the United States is split up into 50 states. Okay, so let's say if there were 50 tribes, each tribe would get a state. To kind of put it in a perspective we understand. They call them, like in today, Jordan, they call them governorates, or they can call them parishes or counties, things like that. Levi was not given that large of an area, but around their cities, they were given a certain amount of land to, like Darren was saying, grow their crops. They've got sheep, goats, cattle, that type of stuff. But it was small. It was like having a ranch around the village or city rather than having an entire state. Yeah, and that's true. They did not get one of those. They weren't supposed to, because they're God's firstborn, and all the other groups were supposed to bring stuff to the temple. Some of it was burned up as a sacrifice to Yahweh. Some of it was sanctified and then given to the priests so that they could eat, and their family sometimes. Yeah.
So, and one curious thing in the Torah portion is that if your daughter committed whoredom or sins, that you were to burn her. It says they would burn her. Now, I don't think that they probably burned any of their daughters, but they were disqualified from the priesthood. But to stay in the temple service, they would have had to burn their daughter by Yahweh's commandment.
Yeah, I've heard issues with what that really means also, because there's a second instance where it seems like someone was doing something like that, but because of the way it's translated into English, it isn't that way. It's a different situation. So on that one, I would have to say I'd have to study that out more to find out. Because to my knowledge, the Lord did not require them to burn someone to death. That was what the pagans did. So there's a different, that's a topic that I have not explored enough. I did a little bit, but I haven't done it enough to give you a competent answer on that. Yeah.
I kind of want to go back to Micah's question from 22, maybe like 11 through 13.
Okay.
So for example, like if the priest's daughter be a widow or divorced and have no child, and she's returned to her father's house as in her youth, then she shall eat of her father's meats, but there shall no stranger eat thereof. And so, what was your question again?
So thank you for finding this section. It kind of helps to know kind of what the flow is and what's going on.
It even says at one point in there, I don't remember in which spot, that if they're unclean for that day, that they're not to eat of the holy food.
That would make sense.
Like even the priests themselves. So if they
Yeah.
have a scab or a leakage or something gross and they're unclean for that day, they're not allowed to eat it.
That would make sense to me, yeah.
But is all the food that comes that they get, that not they grow at their house, but all the food that they get from their duties as priests, that basically the food you talk about that gets given to them, is all of that food that level or classification of holy food? Or is it only certain of the offerings? Like if it's because there's the whatever 5 or 7 types of offering, is one different than the other as far as that classification of clean or holy food?
That's a good
that
question.
they talk about in this chapter.
That's a good question. Jill, why don't you bring the microphone down? We've got, sometimes. Go on ahead. What was that again?
In 22:12, it says, if she is married to an outsider.
Which is a huge thing in the Levite tribe, because they were supposed to marry within the Levites specifically so that they could be set apart for God's firstborn. So if they married a stranger, that put them outside of that. It did. Now, if it's all 7 of the offerings or not, from what I can tell in verse 7, it doesn't say, when the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterward eat the set apart offerings because it is his food. That's all it says. So I'm not sure. I suspect they weren't differentiated. Oh, well, this is a Passover offering and this is a Yom Kippur offering, so, you can do this or that. I suspect it didn't matter. Yeah.
I think if we read through all of Leviticus, contextually, it doesn't seem to differentiate the offerings. It's just there were certain offerings that were for the priests and certain offerings that were just for Yahweh. Those were usually burnt sacrifices. So, the priests had certain foods that were set aside from the sacrifices, including, like the showbread and that type of thing. And they weren't, all of these laws that we're seeing here in 22, I would assume would apply to any of those sacrifices. I mean, there's nothing that differentiates it that I can tell anyway.
Yeah, I'm looking at verse 10 also there. Seems that it's explaining, and again, these are for the Levites, so they're going to be a little different. In fact, I would think they would be stricter. Yeah, they were stricter because they had to. There was more responsibility, and there was more set apartness or the holiness that was required to go in God's presence, or that even if they were just in the holy place, they were that close to God's presence. Only a curtain, a big thick curtain, but a curtain separated them. You don't want any flaws. You don't want any imperfections there, because it will damage you, not the Lord. The Lord's presence itself will just, using my words, eliminate that unholiness. It'll be gone. So I can't stay there. So again, he's doing this to make sure that They toe the line, because, humans, we all drift. It's easy to toe the line at the beginning, and then 6 years later, have you drifted or have you stayed on track? And we as humans do that. I mean, it's just what we do. So we are always trying to kind of watch out for that. And I think that's why he's doing that with them, especially them. I mean, I don't know if they felt the presence when they were like in the holy area doing the showbread and stuff, because that was in that big area. But the Holy of Holies was where it was. It was veiled. Sometimes I've wondered if when they were out there, if they could just feel the power and the authority and the presence of the Lord in there or not. I don't know. Yeah.
So in verse 10, it does say, "No outsider shall eat the holy offering. One who dwells with the priest or a hired servant shall not eat the holy thing. But if the priest buys a person with his money, he may eat it, and the one who is born in his house may eat his food." And I know you often talk about how, like, the offerings that everyone takes to the temple goes to the Levites, so they have food, and also it's stuff for them to sell and make money. So, if it's an offering that they take to the temple, and the Levites are selling it like in the market, so they can have money to buy other things. You've talked about that before, and I was just curious how that differentiates between, what's a holy offering that no one else is allowed to eat,
Right.
and what's not. Because I do understand how you have said in the past, because we talk about how, well, tithing isn't the same as back then because they use cattle. But you reference that, the animals are given to the Levites, even if it's just as meat, that they can then sell basically in the market, so they can have money besides just pieces of food, so they can buy their linen and other things that they need to sustain their family.
Yeah.
But the differentiation of the holy offerings that no one else is allowed to eat is my question.
No, I don't know. I also trying to remember, I don't recall me talking about the Levites selling some of the meat they're given to them in the marketplace to have money. I don't recall if I have said that. I've emphasized that it does feed them, and it does. That is very clear. I don't have the addresses of the scriptures right now. Yeah. It's been hypothesized that was actually a pagan way. Yeah, Tim may know a little bit more on that subject. I know the information is out there on that. I just, there's so much to learn and try to get it all straight. Your mic's not on. Tim? No, you go. Yeah.
I just had a question, and I wanted to point something out in Leviticus 21:10. It says, "Now he who is the high priest among his brethren, on whose head the anointing oil is poured, and who is consecrated with garment, shall not uncover his head nor tear his clothes." Just tying that to the gospel,
Yeah.
that the high priest
Tore his garments.
clothes. He
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to. There's a bunch of stuff they did wrong.
That's a good point.
Morally corrupt there. This is where it starts. Kind of interesting.
That is a good point. That is a good point. Mike, you bring up a very good question, and I don't have the exact answer on that one. I don't. I do not know if they were authorized to take some of this stuff and sell it in the marketplace so they could have cash or not. I don't know, because there was other ways for them to have cash. They had a lot of money that was also donated. There was either tithes, but there were also the extra offerings. And plus they had stuff in their own village area where they probably could have easily sold or traded some of that as well too. I haven't looked at the economy of that tribe and how that all worked, but it is a fascinating subject. Yeah.
So there's a gentleman in the Hebrew Roots movement called Rico Cortez. I don't know if anybody knows him, but he's like, that's what his lane is, I guess you can say. He's really focused his study on temple and sacrifices and what they meant and all other things. So I don't know, maybe he's got some podcast out there talking about it that might help direct you in the right. Because I think it would be really fascinating to understand that a lot better than I do. Because right now when I read through it, I feel like I'm like, just getting through it. And so every once in a while I'm like, oh, I can pull that nugget out. But really a lot of it's like, it's kind of a weird way of doing things, But it would be, I know that it's everything that I begin to understand, I realize that, oh, it's totally like for today, and I'm sure it is too. And some, I'm just not seeing it yet, so. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Rico
Well,
Cortez, yeah.
And he's kind of down a chain of people, because I do know Rico, and I listen to his stuff also, and he's diligently applying himself to learn ancient Near East cultures, and then also biblical studies, and then the temple also. It's like a pyramid of information that he's working on, and I applaud him. He's doing fantastic work. He has mostly learned from two places, Joseph Good, who has done even more, which is amazing. And you have the Temple Institute in Israel. They help the Temple Institute with some stuff, but then they're also a resource back for Joseph Good and for Rico Cortez. They've done a lot of in-depth teachings and studies on the temple, because you have the scriptures, which are critical. There are lots of Jewish literature out there that have survived. The records have survived of how they actually mechanically just mundanely work their way through all this stuff. And buried in there it would be the information. Temple Institute, they are dedicated to building the third temple. They're very open about it. Yeah. Cortez, he's Puerto Rican, if I said it right. Uh-huh. Yep. It's good stuff. Yeah, my God.
I like Leviticus. What can I say? And yeah, so some of these questions are to me not, it's not that I'm just curious more than anything. And I often think the ways we do things now as a culture even are probably mostly corrupt. And that's why I question some of these things. So my next question has to do with animals. And I know we don't do sacrifices anymore, but I do feel like the way they treat their animals was probably across the board the same. And there's a passage where it basically says, any animal that has its testicles bruised, crushed, or torn or cut shall not be an offer to the Lord. You shall not do it within your land.
And where is that again?
Leviticus 22:24. And I think that, I know our culture now, we like to take animals of all kind and make them what we call wethers, meaning they're eunuchs. We sever their testicles.
Yeah, they use a rubber band nowadays. Actually.
No, I get it. I'm just saying,
they do.
I wonder if that's my wonder if that is not like it's necessarily a sin, but you're taking God's creation and altering it for your own personal needs. Like, well, his pee stinks unless I cut his nuts off.
Yeah.
And because that's what they do, and that it's true. But it seems to me that it's kind of referencing that you're taking God's creation and altering it for yourself. And even though we're not offering them as sacrifices, that it's, there was another scripture somewhere there basically references that's what the pagans did. Is they did those types of things to the animals, whether it be for their, just to make them easier to manage in the city or whatnot, so they were less aggressive. But it seems to me that could, just kind of show us today, like, how does it apply to us today? Well, we like to take our animals and cut their horns off and despud them.
Yeah,
cut their, do all these things to alter them for our own, to make them easier to manage, which to a degree I understand. But at the same time, we're altering God's creation, how he made it. We're like, well, these ones shouldn't have horns, and these ones should just, be a little more docile, so I'm going to mutilate them.
Well, hang on just a sec, Lisa. We got Jill in the background there. And then Lisa's up next. Sorry.
I think part of the balance there is that we have dominion over the animals, and with that, we have been given that since the beginning of Genesis. And I always look at it as with that dominion comes an extreme amount of responsibility. It's just like with parenthood. We're given the responsibility of parents, and what greater privilege and heavy burden that is, because of all the responsibility that comes with that. And I think if we take that really seriously, that we have dominion over those animals and therefore we are their caretakers, that perhaps that makes those decisions a little clearer, maybe a little more easy.
And then Lisa.
I've kind of had the same argument, only dealing with people, wondering. God said populate the earth. Should women have their tubes tied, or should men have vasectomies, or should we use birth control? When he said populate the earth, are we doing something that isn't of our? We're not supposed to touch that area. God determines how many children we'll have.
Very good. These are all very, very good questions. And this is where we take what we have in the scripture, whether it's an actual kind of law, commandment, or statute, okay? And then you have situations that we need to learn to apply this to. Some of us have been talking about this off and on, and I've noticed it with people before too. We have to take the principles, which is what Mike is asking very good questions, taking those principles and then applying it to our everyday life and saying, are we doing what the Lord wants us to do in A, B, and C, or are we not doing what the Lord wants us to do in A, B, C? Good questions, very good questions. And Lisa, I'm glad you've had discussions like this as well too. Yeah, some of it's pretty black and white, and we get that part. But then you have the area that you have to learn how to apply this. That's, I think, what kept Moses up so much, not kept him up at night, but unless, all those people were bringing all those cases before him, and, he's getting this stuff put on him now, he's trying to figure out, and it was exhausting him. That's why he's following us, says, look, you need to appoint people below you to kind of get the easy cases, and then they bump it up the food chain as it gets more difficult, because he was wiping himself out, because they were trying to apply these principles to their lives as well. Yeah, Darren?
So to answer Lisa, I would say she's correct that you shouldn't use birth control. We got an example in scripture where he spilled the seed out on the ground to prevent pregnancy, which is the same as any birth control. And it's up to Yahweh. He can have you not have that many kids or have a lot of kids. But a lot of us don't understand, even believers, raising children in the admiration of Yahweh. I don't believe there's any greater ministry that you could have. You could be a healer or anything else, and I would say it's not as great as raising children in the admiration of Yahweh.
Yeah. In the example, the gentleman who was spilling his seed on the ground was a very specific instance with laws that they were supposed to obey that were in Torah. And he specifically, to his own advantage, he thought, and his own wealth, disobeyed the commandment that he was supposed to do because it was his brother's wife. And he wanted all the inheritance. He wanted all the stuff. And he didn't want his brother's widow to have children, and then they got it. So he decided to spill his seed on the ground instead of in her. And he was killed for it. Yeah, very, very. But that, again, that's a principle. So then does that principle apply to these other situations? Yeah, very good one. Anybody else? This is good stuff. Okay, another one, and holiness and the priest. It took a chapter and a half. I really like your answer because they're human. It's so true. But it shows me how important it is and how much of a procedure it was before you approach the Lord. And obviously, we are called to be Kohens, priests, in the Hebrew, the word's Kohen. We're called to be priests. So when we approach the Lord, we need to also realize that we need to get cleaned up and we need to have hopefully a holy, set apart and righteous life in our thoughts and in our deeds so that when we approach him, it's in a relationship that the Father, the Lord wants us to have. That's why Yeshua died. So one of the main reasons he died was to make us so that we could be then holy, to approach the Father in relationship, in a relationship, instead of as a foreigner or a stranger that would be just, banished like the goats at the judgment seat. It's very critical. It's all about relationship to me. And to get to God, we have to be holy. And only Yeshua can do that sacrifice for us when it came to those things. We're responsible for other things, but that one, there's no way. It can't be done. not by humans. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I also thought it was cool how they had like special garments that they could only wear when they went closer to the holiest of holies, and they had to take those off before they came out, and they could never wear those garments in a common way. And how that even like when you approach him in his holy place, you have to, wear special clothes, and they're not clothes that you wear for everybody else. I don't know. It's just kind of cool, It's specificity of like what you bring, Like I made a bunch of bread for potluck or whatever, and I'm gonna give some for my son's birthday tomorrow. And I listened to the sermon about holiness, and so I looked at all my bread, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go bring some to Sabbath, so I'm gonna bring my best bread, right? Because like, rather than for the birthday party, right? Why would I bring my best bread for my son's birthday party when I could bring my best bread to the congregation? I don't know, you get what I'm saying? And I wouldn't have thought about that before I listened to this sermon that kind of pointed that out to me. I was like, oh, that's a good point. You know what I mean? So I don't know. So it's kind of interesting. I was listening to those sermons this week, and then this is what we're reading. So it's just kind of like, maybe God's trying to tell me something.
Well, yeah, and you're right. And, how the Lord sees us is how the Lord sees us. And it's revealed in Scripture several times. I mean, I'm majorly thinking of some of the stories Yeshua taught and then what's in Revelation, the white robes. You don't see any other color in the Lord's presence because that's the righteousness that he gives us. Thinking about the story about the man who decided to wear his own clothes to the wedding and was spotted and kicked out because he decided, because the point of that to me was always, he decided his righteousness was good enough. Okay? Cain slew Abel. Cain's sacrifice was improper and it was rejected. Okay? It was rejected, tried to do their own selfish way. And I'm trying to think, I think it's in Isaiah, Yeshayahu, that, the best we can do are as filthy rags in God's presence. They're not the white robes of righteousness. They're not. The best we can do is it. And you can't bring that. That's why the things that are blemished are impure, they're unholy. That's what they're representing. You want to give God your best. Yes, ma'am.
White is for purity. That's why brides wear white.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's what when a woman gets married, she wears a white dress, it's to represent that purity. Yeah. And as we had looked, I think it was 2 Torah services back, when I had a couple scriptures up from Revelation. What makes our garments white? They're washed in the blood of the lamb that was sacrificed. They've got to be washed in that blood. And there's a really good song about that. But it's true. It's true. We've got to go through that. Yeah, Tim.
I find it kind of interesting that the priests, the pilgrims, had to have pure, they had to be like free from physical defects. No eczema, no broken legs, they can't be lame, nothing. It's got to be the right hairs.
Yeah.
It's interesting also to me that those same people were created to intercede for people who were lame, who didn't have the blind eyes or the deaf ears. That's who the Lord cares about most. It's kind of interesting. He cares about the widows, the orphans, those who are more helpless.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, it's this contrast. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
He really cares about those people. Yet he wants those who come to approach him to be, and ritually and physically pure and blameless.
And I think it was Darren brought something up, and I think a few other people are aware of that too. When you had the male Levites, that once they reached, I don't remember what age they reached when they started doing their training, but I believe it ended when they were, their 29th year was their last year. And they were trained on how to do whatever it was they were going to do. And they have like teams of people. They call them a course, C-O-U-R-S-E a lot of times. So it was a group, and they would rotate around doing different things. And that's how they can figure out because they know some of the priest names, and they know some of their courses, which ones they were in. They can date certain events in the Gospels because those records were preserved. I think it was David that set that up. He set up several things. I think it was King David who did that. But so then you served in the temple area, which is a huge complex, not just the one building we think of. It was huge. People were living there. There were thousands of Levites doing all this stuff. It was huge. And then when you were 50, if I remember right, you rotated out of active service and you went into the training or teaching service, whether they did it there or they did it back in the village, I'm not sure. 25 was it they started? Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. I was 25 years old when they started. So there was a whole cycle. So if you had those blemishes, you weren't, kicked out of the Levite tribe, they would put you in something else that didn't require that type of holiness. Because again, they're representing also Israel. They have to be that perfect state as much as you can as a human being. So I see a hand up.
Back to animals. In Exodus 23:19 and 34:26, the best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. I understood that to mean that you are not to cull an animal that was still nursing. And I know that the tribe of Judah takes it as you're not supposed to have meat and dairy together. But
Correct.
And then in this week's Torah portion, Leviticus 22:27, it says, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thereafter it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire to Yahweh. I was just wondering if anybody has any clarification on that.
That's a very good point. I'm aware of both of those also. Yeah, especially when we were in Israel. We were there for a while, and you ran into it, no cheeseburgers at McDonald's, things like, yeah. But there was a time limit that they finally figured out was, because a friend of mine was at a women's luncheon thing, and there was a rabbi teaching, and they had a meal early, and then they had the long teaching and discussion. Then they had a second set of food, and she had eaten, I think it was meat at the first one, or dairy. She had like cream in her coffee. Then the next one, she had meat, and a couple of the women got upset and said, no, you're breaking that. And this is the woman who was telling me that in a village. She said, so she talked to the rabbi. The rabbi came over and talked, and he goes, no, she's doing okay, because it's been, I think it was 3 or 4 hours since she had the previous, because they figured it's gone through your whole system, so they're not going to mix. But yeah, they believe that you should not have dairy and meat together at the same time. And then, like you said accurately, the other school of thought is you would cause trauma to the animal if you took it off its mother's udder, whatever it is, a goat, cow, whatever, and butcher it. And so they feel that that's what that means. You don't boil a kid while it's still nursing or in its mother's milk. So and then there's also the school of thought of the pagans doing some type of service that we don't know. I don't know if I want to know. But that they would do something like that. It was in that culture area, they knew it was a pagan thing, so you didn't do it. Hard to say. And then Lisa, and then back up to Micah.
Okay, I just missed the verse you said in Exodus. What was that verse?
It's in both 23:19 and 34:26.
And the question more so than the meat and dairy at the same time, we don't really care about that as much. It makes it seem like while it's nursing, meaning from when it's born till while it stops nursing. But in Leviticus, it's basically when it's 8 days old, you can take it. So that's more of the question that we had as opposed to that other topic. So is it while it's still young enough to nurse, or is it on day 8 you can remove it for a holy sacrifice?
It's a very good question I'm not sure of. I did notice it was on the 8th day.
Well,
we do circumcise on the 8th day. So technically we are changing God's biological creation on that day at his commandment. So that could be the difference.
And this is specifically says after 7 days for a burnt offering, which they were not eating.
That's a good point too, Darren. Yeah. Good questions, Everett. Good questions. Yeah, dive in. Pull stuff out of here and there, and let's see how it works together. Thank you for the 25 too. That was good. Anything else on those? The next question is then, why is it important for us to know what are acceptable offerings unto Yahweh? Because we're learning about some of that stuff in here. Why is that important?
Well, I mean, if you want to be accepted and obedient, you should probably know what is required of you. Like,
Yes.
I want my children to be obedient, so they're not in trouble all the time, and then we're all upset.
Yeah. So let's say Don here wants to, he gets a little notification, hey, you need to come in and take your driver's license test, you know. I know a lot of us, when we get older, they want you to come in because of our eyes and stuff. So Don goes in to take the driver's license test. But Don didn't study for the driver's license test. In fact, he was watching a YouTube video on how to plant corn. Okay? Not that if he's from Minnesota, because I know how to speak Minnesotan language. I learned that language. Would that do him any good, taking the DMV driver's test? No. He studied the wrong thing. He'll say, yeah, well, I don't know how to drive the car, but I can tell you how to plant the corn that the car's driving by, but it won't do you any good. When you get to more serious matters, like you come before the throne and everything you said is opened up and you denied Yeshua, oops. An acceptable offering is to submit ourselves to his lordship. Everybody wants a savior. Who doesn't? It's what comes with it, though. Okay? The lepers that were all cleansed, one came back. We all want to be that one. Okay? So there are acceptable offerings. So accepting, we offer our lives in service to him. We accept him as our master. We go up to the doorpost of his house and he drives an awl through our ear, showing that we are now bondservant to that house, the house of whoever it was. We are to the house of Yahweh, to the house of Yeshua, to the house of David. Okay? That's an acceptable offering. You don't want to get the name wrong. You don't want to get which God you're worshiping incorrect in that situation because it's eternal, and that's important. That's an acceptable offering. Yes, ma'am.
I want to take your Don analogy a little bit further, too, because our humanity, he's been driving, for however many years. Mm-hmm. And so our mindset is, I know how to pass that. I know how to pass the driver's test because I've been driving for 60 some odd years, right? So I'm going to spend my time watching corn videos on YouTube, right? And don't we do that with our walk? Right? We've been saved our whole life, or we've been saved for however long, and so we know the basis, and so we don't have to study it, and we're smooth sailing and all of that. So we'll do A, B, and C, and we don't realize when the test comes, what's going to be on there that we didn't study for, that we are going to fail at.
It's a good point. Yeah, Michael's going this way. Are you okay, Michael? Is that hand over?
It's okay. Well, I was just gonna add on to that. I grew up in the church, and so I thought, I know how to love God, love others. It wasn't until this last couple years that I was like, I have no idea what it means to love God. I have no idea how to love him and how important it is, and so that's been all consuming for me. It's. I just want to please my Father in heaven, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and so we can guess. We can kind of, close our eyes, turn the lights out at night in the room, and you can guess what to do, kind of like a shotgun approach. You shoot it because a shotgun blast is opposite of a rifle. Rifle is usually right onto a target, and it hits it with great accuracy. With the shotgun, you're not quite so sure. And, let's just hit the area and hope some of the pellets hit the target. When it comes to something like that, I really wouldn't do that, and especially acceptable offerings. Numerous examples. But the Lord is not setting us up for failure. He's not making us guess like a lot of the false gods do in their priesthoods. They make you guess, and you're really never quite sure if you got it right. But with the Lord, he spells it all out for you, really easy, all through the Torah, which is we're doing here. But we bring in the gospel with this one as it ties in. There's many, many times Yeshua sat down for hours and days talking with them, trying to get these concepts across to them. So there's no mystery here. He's not trying to keep the secret knowledge from you. He wants you to succeed. He's giving you the answers to the exam questions, as I've said. He really has. Yes.
And what's really sad, while the Lord is not setting us up to fail and he wants us to succeed, our culture, our Christian culture is blinded and setting us up, in a really, to fail, right? I mean, I came out of a big church, a Sunday church, basic, and nowadays, so many of the churches, you're following the topical thing. You're filling in the blanks. You're coming, you're showing up, you're doing that, you're going home. You're not diving deeper. You're not studying it. Now that's on us. But when that's the culture you grow up in from the time you're little, you don't think about it until your eyes are opened.
It's a good point. I have not been to a lot of large mainstream churches for some time. I'll go visit one every once in a while if I'm invited or somebody wants to go with them. But I'm talking just in the last year with several people who are exposed to that world. And I was just chatting with somebody this last week on the phone. And I said, they're teaching what now? I said, I remember when that got introduced in as a new thing. I know, Sharon, you're laughing because we remember those days. It was a minority little sliver thing that got its way in. But now I'm going, oh my goodness, they're teaching it that much now? I was shocked at some of the stuff. It was very much mainstream. Yeah, Don?
Well, I remember coming into this kind of teachings and things about food and everything, and when I first found out really what the Lord felt about what he called food and what we called food, and I thought that was quite something, but when it really changed me is when I come to the word abomination, and when he looks at the food and he said he had set this aside, but when you eat this type of a food, it's an abomination unto him. But I was kind of wondering what kind of a food banquet they would have when he would come and they would go over to the coast and you'd have every kind of thing you could think of seafood on the menu.
Right.
Or something like this. Or back in the Midwest, it's always the other white meat, which is pork or swine,
Yeah.
So if I want to please the Lord, then I felt it wasn't that hard for me to lose those different items that he said was an abomination.
That's true. And I had to go through this. Oh, yeah, Michael.
Him saying that reminded me, I remember planning many men's breakfast, and everybody's main concern was, is there enough bacon?
I hear you. Well, I know a lot of people in this room and a lot of people either listening now or who are thinking about it now. You have to look at that. What's an acceptable offering unto Yahweh in my life today? Is it going and doing certain holidays that we used to do and we were raised to do? Okay, one, either they were fun, and then later on they were put over, to me, a covering of religiosity and said, no, this is an acceptable offering to Yahweh. But as we dove into the scriptures, you find out, oops, maybe they're not. In fact, Yahweh always calls these his feasts, his Moedim, okay? Not Jewish ones, not a cultural one, they're his. So then I have to decide what's acceptable to him on those. That's another, you have the food, you have the clothing, you have when we work, when we don't work, the holidays that we do. What do you want to do? Yeah.
For those thinking about it, I quit eating pork and shellfish and those things before I believed that that it was an abomination to Yahweh. I still believed that it was okay to eat those things. But when I was challenged by someone about that, I said to myself, well, even if it's okay to eat that, I know Yahweh will I can honor Yahweh by getting rid of it. So if there's any doubt in what is acceptable and what not, if there's any doubt whatsoever, or until you research it and you can go without doubt, I say give it up. I say make sure your life is acceptable to Yahweh. And then find out later, what It's true and what isn't, when you can study it up and understand it.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, Barbara. Who's going to get there first? Woohoo! Darren got there first.
Years ago, the doctor took me off all pork products because it was damaging my liver. When I met Don, we went out to breakfast, and he mentioned bacon, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't eat pork. He said, I meant turkey bacon.
Yeah, technically bacon is a certain kind of meat. It usually comes from a pig, like 99% of the time it does. But yeah, they can do it with turkey too. So that is cute. That is cute. So what are some examples of acceptable offerings for us today and unacceptable offerings? Now I put the scales here. One, you have the person here. And to me, that's one of the answers. We give ourselves to Yahweh. That's a very vulnerable, open position in a position of worship. And obviously the Lord would be the sun, the light that's behind them. So we can make our lives an acceptable offering unto Yahweh by how we live. Also with the scales, it seems like the scales are even. They're not uneven. There are several times in Scripture where you're using weights that benefit you, because a lot of things were weighed out, and you paid them by the pound, okay? So you could cheat them and have a weight up there. So if they were supposed to give you, or we'll use our terms so we can understand, let's say they're supposed to give you 1,000 pounds, right? Half an American ton. But you had a big block that said 1 ton on it, or half a ton. But it actually weighed 1,400 pounds. That means they gave you 1,400 pounds. You only paid them for 1,000 pounds. And you took that 400 and you made money off it. Those are unequal weights. Those are unjust weights. It's that principle. You can do that to someone. And so a lot of times people will come up with a weight that they knew. They'd put it on one side of the scale and they said, put yours on there. And whoop, they would be unequal. You were in extreme trouble because you were obviously cheating people. So that's a little bit of why I have the balanced and the unbalanced, but also the emphasis, as it says in the middle and in the scale there, it's all about me, only me, just me and me. Is that an acceptable offering to Yahweh? I found it isn't. It's all about him. Yeah. He's the king, I'm not. I don't try to wear God's shoes is another expression that was taught to me, and I thought, boy, that's a great way to put it. There is one who tried that. They were at the throne. For how long, I don't know. Extremely gifted, perfect. Worshiping the Lord. Holy, holy, holy. All the time. They were outside of time, but every day, you know. And yet he decided he could wear God's shoes. And he did it was 5, we counted them up in Isaiah. We counted them up in men's group, the 5 I ams. And they were all based on pride, and he was cast out. And now he leads all the evil spirits and the demons and such and the devils. Hasatan. He decided to try that. It didn't work well, did not go well. And the last question I had down was, what is meant by an eye for an eye, and how is this relevant to us today? So if dealing with animals, perfect, imperfect, what do we do with them? Great questions. This one's huge. This one comes up a lot. And I put it in there as a question also because it's been brought up to me many times by people who go with, I'll call the modern Western Christian viewpoint, okay? Just so you know specifically who I'm talking about. That the Old Testament is God being a vengeful God. You know, look at this, eye for an eye, boy, he's gonna poke your eye out, he's gonna do all these terrible stuff to you and things like that. It was one of many examples. But then you get to the New Testament, and it's like, a breath of fresh air. Now we have this type of God. And those extremes were always presented to me in one form or another. One thing I've learned to come into this movement, people who are considering it, is bless their hearts, they meant well, but I would say that is an incorrect view. It's not because it's not accurate. And one of the ways is they would point to an eye for an eye. So what does that really mean when they're talking about that? Because it happens in several times, including in this Torah section here. Yeah.
Well, I believe it just means that the punishment should equal the crime. So a tooth isn't as valuable as your eye. So if the victim lost a tooth, it wasn't as harsh of a punishment as if he lost an eye.
Right.
So that's why I think it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So somebody loses their life, then your life's forfeited, basically.
Yeah, Tim.
I would like to update it and say if you're borrowing your friend's mower and you break it, you owe him a new mower. Or that's versus if you were borrowing his truck and you broke his truck or crashed it. It's a bigger penalty. I mean, that's if you didn't have insurance and all that stuff, but that's just an example.
But there's also, and I apologize, I went to grab the notes I put a lot of time into, and only half of them are on here, so I must have saved it wrong and I didn't check it when I printed it out. I do apologize. It's interesting because in Leviticus 24, it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but then just like the next verse, somebody knocks their tooth out. Somebody knocks someone else's tooth out. Did it tell you to go up and submit yourself and they knock your tooth out? No, you paid recompense for it. Yeah, you paid recompense for it. And there's many examples, if you read through carefully, because it's easy to lump them together and read quickly. There are many examples where it is trying to fit the punishment for the crime as far as worth goes, for two reasons. One is to protect the person who actually did the crime, because you have feuds, you have vendettas, you have blood feuds especially. When we were in the Middle East, I could talk to somebody from one tribe in the country I was in, and they had a feud going with another tribe from something that happened 900 years ago. Okay? It obviously, killing each other now didn't fit the crime. Or in vendettas, the revenge. That's why they had the refuge cities. If you inadvertently did some things, you didn't mean to, but you did kill someone, you went to one of those places of refuge. The people that were pursuing you were going to kill you because they were required to restore honor to the tribe and to met punishment. But it was involuntary. And so the case would be tried there, and the Levite priest then would decide it was involuntary. So the people seeking their blood could not kill them in that city. But the person was warned, you leave the city, you're on your own. The only way they could leave was when the high priest died. Then when the next one came in, they could leave. So sometimes people want to give more punishment than fits the crime. So it's also to protect that angle as well. Where the second category comes in is when it's murder. Then it seems every time you're put to death, it's murder. That was a clear difference. And it has a lot to do with the blood hitting, when it gets onto the ground, that changes a lot of stuff physically and spiritually. And the Lord takes that so seriously that it is a capital crime and you are put to death for that. I've got Michael and then Darren.
I think it also follows that Yahweh is very orderly in all that he does. He lays everything out in an exact order the way he wants it. And he knows his creation survives on emotion in a lot of ways, and having a direct punishment to fit the crime removes emotion out of the equation. Therefore, if somebody does something to you, you're not just blasting out of anger to do something over that and hold that vengeance and continue with something that may not have ever been needed to be that big.
Yep. And this happens in Europe. It happens here in the United States. Hatfields and the McCoys, oh my goodness. Yeah, it happens here in the United States. Happens in Europe big time, especially in a certain country we all know in Southern Europe, which is very well known for some areas where they will continue on those feuds for a very long time. Okay? So it's protect both ways. It's supposed to balance it out so it's equal. And if it isn't equal, if it's too harsh or if it's too lenient, someone's going to cry out. And I was just reading about that in the news just this last week again. That people felt the judge was way too lenient on the victim's family. And so they cried out about that. So it's still an issue. And then we are just about out of time. And then the last two questions, where is Yeshua in this parashah account? And then what areas of this parashah account are relevant to us today? I always have those there as a backstop. We're answering them a lot more now. At the beginning, people went, huh? But I've noticed over time now, people are answering these questions throughout as we talk through stuff, so they seem a little redundant, but I just want to make sure we don't forget them. And then there is a backstop. So good discussion. And sometimes with a midrash, you wind up with more questions than you started with. And then sometimes it's as clear as mud when you finish. And you need to wait for the sediment to settle a little bit. And then pray and ask the Lord. Some issues we've gotten quickly, and I know sometimes you have to come back to them every while. And finally you get it. Sharon has shared with me stories when she has done that. It wasn't clear at the very beginning, and then years later she'd come back and like read through her journal or something like that, and she'd go, oh, that's right, that was an issue, but it's not now because the Lord answered it. So I encourage you to do that. And if I have said anything that you're not sure about, or you take one way, but I actually meant it a different way, we don't know until we talk about it, feel free to come up and talk to me about it. Thank you for joining us online also. And we'll take a short break and then start our main service at 11:30.